shake hands with a couple of people and tell them, say, Easter changes everything. Come on, shake hands with somebody. And it does, because if we live in a world where dead men come back to life, that means anything is possible. We greet you in love and in the power of the risen and reigning Christ, whom we celebrate today, who makes all things possible. And there's a word we'd like to share with you from the scripture out of the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 30. Just one verse of scripture, and this is what the text says. But God raised him from the dead. Amen. We're concluding this series called 8 Words That Change Your Life, and the word for today is but. Everybody say but. But is a powerful word. It's only 3 letters, but this small word can make a big difference. When we want to be tactful in communication, we preface our statements with encouragement. We say, I love you, and then we add, but I don't like your attitude. The conjunction but in that position cancels out anything that's been said before. In other words, I love you, but that doesn't count because I have a problem with your attitude. However, if you change the sentence around, the message is totally different. If we say your attitude is bad, but I love you, the sentence now means that your attitude does not matter. It only matters that I love you. So what comes before the but is canceled, and what comes after it is what really matters. This is critical to comprehending the power of this one sentence that fills our scriptural spotlight today. Here in Acts 13, Paul stands in Pisidia to proclaim the gospel. He reviews the history of Israel, climaxing with the ministry of John the Baptist and the coming of the Messiah. He makes it clear that God was at work in and for the people of Israel, preparing the path for the coming of the Christ, even amid the rebellion and faithlessness of the covenant community. God is faithful even when we are not. Addressing them, he proclaims that despite having read and heard the message of the prophets, they did not understand because they summarily rejected and crucified him on the cross of Calvary. But God raised him from the dead. What comes before the but is canceled, and what comes after it is what really matters. But God, when connected to our collective challenges in life, when you say that, that phrase is what up is to down, what in is to out, what sorrow is to joy, what life is to death. But God stands totally opposed to the negative roar of our world. The world says no, but God says yes. The world says can't, but God says can. The world says won't, but God says will. The world says stop, but God says go. The world says don't, but God says do. The world says defeat, but God says victory. But God climbs the highest mountain, crosses the darkest valley, and sings the loudest praise. But God is a statement of defiance and delight. Defiance in the face of despair, disappointment, and delay, and delight because we can celebrate our hope, claim our destiny, and stake hold on our future. But God confuses, confounds, and confronts the enemies of truth, faith, hope, and love, and declares in tones bright and clear that God is still alive. God is still on the throne. God is still in charge, and God will have the last word. It's an easy thing, my friends, to become depressed and discouraged by the problems in our lives. In fact, it often appears plausible to feel defeated by the relentless slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. For honestly, we are surrounded on every hand by trouble, tragedy, misfortune, dislocation, violence, and death. Death fills our world, stalks our streets, and stings our spirits. It pollutes the air, poisons the water, kills our joy, dashes our hope, and snatches our loved ones away prematurely. Dean Ronald Thielman of Harvard University, in a book entitled Constructing a Public Theology, wrote that seen from space, the orb of our world appears to be a beautiful spear, delicately suspended against a brilliant black background. The viewer is nearly overwhelmed by the awesome beauty and silent serenity of the earth, for in the airless void of space, no sound can be heard, and the visual splendor of this fragile globe communicates a sense of tranquility and well-being. However, as we leave the ethereal realms of space and draw closer to this planet that is home to us all, that sense of tranquility and well-being began to dissipate and disappear. From the fractured ozone layer to the arid deserts of Africa, from malnourished children to emaciated adults, death and destruction are pronounced. Dr. Thielman goes on to say, we are surrounded by the cries of God's people. 795 million people hungry, 1.3 billion people living in extreme poverty, 15,000 children dying daily of malnutrition, millions of people with no access to medical care, millions suffering the agony of addiction, abuse, and neglect. People are sighing, dying, and crying, their dreams destroyed, their hopes dismantled, their prospects have perished. Death has come to them and it comes to us. Death leaves no stone unturned, no body untainted, no life untouched, no heart unbroken. Even Jesus Christ, who came into this world as the perfect specimen of the human family, and through his life he demonstrated for all of us what it means to be a true child of God. And yet even he was stalked by death, stabbed by suffering, stung by pain, and startled by disappointment. And taking his place, casting his lot with us in our desperate situation, death killed the Son of God, strangled the life out of him, signed the requisition for his disposition, sealed the order for his termination, and delivered him into the chilly, waiting, cold, open grave. Dr. Herbert McGabe said Jesus died of being human in an inhuman world, a world structured by a web of violence that crisscrosses human history. And on the cross, Jesus took the brokenness of humanity upon himself and he died. It seemed that he was finished, and people will write you off. If you don't believe me, ask Tiger Woods. Despite winning 4 Masters and 14 major championships and being the world's top-ranked player for 683 weeks, the Guardian magazine called him a lost, sorry soul who was once invincible, broken in so many ways by challenges, private and public, personal and professional. His career appeared finished, but that just goes to show you that when others write you off, you gotta know that your story is not over. If your setback amazed them, then let your comeback confuse them. The University of Virginia Cavaliers likewise suffered a historic humiliation last year when they lost in the first round to Maryland, Baltimore County. Many said the loss would always be a scar, but Coach Bennett, a man of faith, knew that ignoring it would leave the team irrevocably damaged, whereas embracing it and trying to learn from it and evolve through it would help them to be successful in the future. And he turned out to be right, because the Cavaliers beat top-ranked Texas Tech 85-77 in overtime to win the national championship. And As much as I applaud that, this is what I like. That just before overtime, Bennett received a text from Dabo Swinney, coach of the reigning national champs, the Clemson Tigers. And the text said, no matter what happens in the next few moments, let the light that shines in you be brighter than the light that shines on you. I like that, because people will write you off. They did it to Jesus. It looked like the curtain had fallen on the light of the world. But we are here rejoicing today because death could not claim Jesus and the grave could not hold his body down. God raised him from the dead. There are those who think they can afford to live in this world without divine intervention, who will teach and tell you and I that we can do everything. Now, I'll be the first to admit that we can do a whole lot more than we are doing. Say amen. And there are some heartaches we can handle, some bills we can pay, some changes we can make, some battles we can fight, some situations we can remedy, some problems we can solve. All we need to do is to use the strength, creativity, power, hope, faith, courage, and love that God has already given us. And yet at the same time, we cannot do it all. There are some people who are captivated by this unjust culture of contentment and believe that they can live in this world without redemption from Christ or salvation from God. And some of them are in the church. There are those in the body of Christ who confess a shallow theology that applies only to those who are already privileged, already comfortable, ethically complacent, and socially insensitive. These homespun popcorn theologians believe that they do not need to continuously seek God's direction. They don't need anybody to tell them what to do. They don't need to pray constantly or ask anybody else to pray with them or for them. They believe that they know the mind of God already and can dictate what God will do and won't do on the basis of their narrow understanding of 2 or 3 passages from the Bible. They think they can afford to get along without God's hand breaking into the events and places and circumstances of our time. But I want you to know that is not the theme, nor is it the focus of biblical theology, because that kind of faith doesn't work on the underside of privilege or on the backside of history. There is a hope that comes from the dark ghetto of malign neglect and denigrating exploitation. There is a joy that echoes off the rough side of the mountain, because we know what it means to stake our lives and risk our security and build our hopes on the but God of unfailing love, undying hope, and unsinkable faith. So we lift up our hearts today. We lift up our heads today. We turn our heads around to see where we are and remember how we got here. We survey all the long way that God has led us. We remember all the bad things that could have happened to us. The cars that we were in that spun out of control, the ships that we were on that ran into rough seas, the planes that we rode that battled with turbulent winds, the bad decisions we made that nearly wrecked our lives, the foolish chances we took that almost did us in, the tragedies that could have struck us, the diseases that tried to afflict us, the heartbreak that almost destroyed us, the sickness that could have killed us, the meanness that could have discouraged us, the crises that almost wiped us out, the confusion that could have pulled our world apart. You've had some mean opposition on the highway of upward mobility. You had some enemies you didn't even know about. Folks were talking about you that you couldn't even hear. Dangers were swirling around you that you couldn't even see. There were horrors you couldn't imagine, terrors you couldn't conceive, problems you couldn't predict, disasters you couldn't anticipate, obstacles you couldn't discern. But God saved you from them all. And that's how I made it. That's how you made it. That's how we made it, to celebrate another Easter Sunday, to see another Lord's Day, to declare God's goodness one more time. It wasn't because we didn't have problems and troubles and burdens and sickness and sorrow. We had all of that and some, but God. kept us every day, brought us all the way, led us every step, held us in the hollow of God's unchanging hand, rocked us in the cradle of God's eternal love. David said, and rightly so in Psalm 34:19, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers us from them all. And that's the only song I know how to sing. That's the only testimony I have to offer. That's the only message I have to preach. That's the only shout that I have to shout. That's the only moan that I know how to moan. But God, we would have been down flat on our faces. We would have been worn out and done in, destroyed by our enemies, dead and forgotten, broken and beaten, hung up, strung out, broken down, hauled away. But God saved my soul from death, kept my feet from falling, wiped tears from my eyes. Now I recognize that some folk don't know where their blessings come from. They attribute everything to luck, circumstance, talent, and fate. But that's not my testimony, because I know when your luck runs out, when your Powerball number doesn't hit, when your horoscope looks horrible, when your rabbit's foot gets lost and circumstances cut you down, when fate fractures your spirit, when all hope seems lost and your life is spiraling out of control. It may seem like you're done. It may appear your life is finished, but God, see, some folk don't know where their blessings come from. They don't even understand why we gather in church, and that's why it's so easy for them to lose focus and fixate on the problems while missing the prescription, because they don't know where they are or how they got here. They think they got here all by themselves. They think their skill, brilliance, intelligence, goodness, money, network, and connections were the keys. But I need you to understand clearly today that I'm not confused, I'm not deceived, I'm not ignorant, I'm not crazy, and I don't have amnesia. I know that I am, where I am, what I am, who I am, how I am, by the grace of God. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I've already come. It was grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me on. The agents of the demonic did Jesus mighty bad. And if you or I accept the challenge of Jesus, if you try to solve human problems, if you try to help somebody, if you try to save somebody, if you can't be categorized or pigeonholed, if you are preciously unpredictable and alive in the Spirit of God, they're going to treat you bad too. That people will lie to you and then lie on you. They will scandalize your name. They'll discount your contribution, not because you are wrong, but because your light is shining. Your testimony is strong and the witness is clear. The death of Jesus Christ is not an illusion. The crucifixion was real. Trouble is not a bad dream. Persecution is not paranoia. Just because you're not paranoid doesn't mean that nobody's after you. The cross is real. Life is hard. The world is mean, and your enemies can be dangerous. The cross is not some light discomfort, nor some slight pain. It is not the mere inability to buy something that you cannot afford, don't need, can't fit, and soon will not want. It is not the lack of money to buy clothes that do not fit, trying to conceal a nakedness that you cannot hide. The cross is not our private deprivation, but the cross is the unavoidable and inescapable political, social, personal, and spiritual consequence of trying to do the will of God. When you recognize the humanity, equality, and dignity of all God's children, when you care for the despised, the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, and the dishonored, when you work for the liberation of all the oppressed, when you refuse to accept simple definitions of life or narrow explanations of experience, when you realize that everything that shines is not silver, everything glittering is not gold, everything pretty is not platinum, and everybody grinning with a grill up in your face is not your friend. When you stick your neck out and put your life on the line so that the excluded can be included, so that the needy are not trampled by the greedy, so that the humanity of all people is honored and acknowledged, so that every child can claim a world-class quality education, so that the homeless can be housed and the trampled down can become upward bound. When you work on these aims and labor towards these goals, you better expect to suffer some social, economic, political, and spiritual consequences. You can expect to bear the cross, because the cross is just as real today as it was 2,000 years ago. But I also want to remind you, it is just as resilient, because tragically this week, the cathedral at Notre Dame caught fire. But as the media peered in through the smoke and ashes to cover this tragedy, as the cameras gave us an inside look at just what had transpired, the walls were burned, the pews were singed. But if you look at the camera, the cross was still standing. The cross is resilient, and the consequences of following Christ are serious, because there's not a single person of faith who has ever spoken out, stepped up, or stood up for justice that has not been excoriated, investigated, and intimidated by the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and the IRS. They deported Marcus Garvey. They compromised Booker T. Washington. They condemned W.E.B. Du Bois. They slandered Paul Robeson. They murdered Martin Luther King. They assassinated the Kennedy brothers. They excoriated Malcolm X. They slew Medgar Evers. They expelled Adam Clayton Powell. They incarcerated Nelson Mandela. They disrespect Maxine Waters. They blackballed Colin Kaepernick, and they blocked Barack Obama. Because when you work to change things for the better, so that God's will can be done on earth as it is in heaven, you will bear the cross. I only need 10 Easter witnesses. I'll make number 11. Just tap somebody and say, I know that's right. See, the crucifixion is real. It is our experience. As we do the will of God, we will face denial, betrayal, and crucifixion. The devil was against Jesus. He's going to be against you. They lied on Jesus. They're going to talk about you. They persecuted Jesus. They'll victimize you. Plato said in his Republic that a person who is holy, just, and good becomes intolerable in the eyes of those who do not wish to do good, nor desire to see good come to pass. The world will not tolerate those who are serious about their faith, who try to walk what they talk and live what they live. Never forget, my friends, that Jesus was crucified by good church-going people who thought they were defending the law of God against a person who, in their opinion, blasphemed it. Nobody is as dangerous as a bigoted fanatic who just got up off their knees. They'll kill you in the name of God. That's how they did Jesus. He went about doing good. He came to his own, but his own received him not. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He fed the hungry. He strengthened the weak. He delivered those in bondage. But he had a hard way to go, a terrible death to die. They plotted to kill him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Peter denied him. Judas betrayed him. The soldiers arrested him. The crowd ridiculed him. Pilate condemned him. Herod refused to help him. He was arraigned without an attorney, tried on trumped-up charges, convicted without cause. He could not carry the cross they put on his back, so they accosted a black man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, a worshiper from northern Africa, and they compelled him to bear the cross. That big, beautiful brown brother took up that cross, and as he gazed into the eyes of his cosmic partner, I heard him raise the question, must Jesus bear this cross alone and all the world go free? And as he looked at Jesus, he answered his own question. and said, no, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. When they got to Calvary's Hill, they stretched Jesus out on the cross, nailed his hands to the cross beam, nailed his feet to the long beam, stood the cross up, and jammed it hard into a hole in the ground until it jarred every nerve in his body. They hammered wedges around the base of the cross, and he groaned upon the tree. He didn't play dead. He didn't pretend to die. He really died. He died. I wish I was an older preacher, because right there I'd say he died. Until the sun refused to shine, until the moon would not glow, until oceans would not roar, and brooks would not babble, and birds would not fly, and rivers would not rush. He died until the veil of the temple was split in two, until he drew the sting out of death and snatched the victory from the grave. He died and dropped his head between his shoulders. His eyes swam in the murky sea of death. But just before he died, I heard him say, it's finished. I paid the price. It's finished. Trouble can't last always. It's finished. The wicked have to cease from troubling, and the weary will get some rest. It's finished. Humanity is free. The devil is defeated. I need 5 of y'all to high five somebody and say, he finished that thing. So that joy is greater than sorrow. And he breathed his last. He yielded up his spirit. Joseph buried him, put him in a brand new vacuum tomb. He was sealed in his grave, guarded in his death, and he stayed right there all night Friday night, all day Saturday, got restless in the grave, stepped down into hell, opened up a revival meeting, brought dead folk to life, taught mean folk how to love. He stayed right there, but early Sunday morning, God raised him from the dead, lifted him high, planted his feet on top of our problems, and I heard him say, all power is in my hands. What does that mean, preacher? I can handle what you can't handle. I specialize in burdens you can't carry, stresses you can't relieve, sickness you can't heal, mountains you can't move, deficiencies you can't overcome, tragedies you can't transcend, sorrows you can't negotiate, rivers you can't cross, boundaries you can't penetrate, ceilings you can't break through, miseries you can't fathom, questions you can't answer, because all power is in my hands. Good morning, church. May the Lord bless you real good. Folk will make it rough for you. Life will come down around you. You will have trouble. You will have to cry. But walk out of here today saying, but God will hear you when you pray. But God will lift up your bowed down head. But God will make a way out of no way. But God will make your enemies leave you alone. But God will hold your hand. I was blind, but God opened my eyes. I was sinking, but God lifted me up. I was lost, but God came and found me. And somebody here was on your way out, but God brought you back in. You were on your way down, but God lifted you up. And if you know that God made a way, then put your hand in your neighbor's hand and tell them, if it had not been for the Lord on my side, where would I be? If you know that God will turn things around, then shake that other neighbor's hand and say, it may look bad, but God, you may not see a way out, but God, won't he do it? Give him a resurrection pray.